Well, it is a very happy new year to everyone at home. This is a special broadcast of Media Monitor 2017, the first of its kind. Good morning and thank you so much for choosing us once again. I'm your host, Alicia Ajali. Here's what we have coming up for you on the show this morning. We start by looking at the Vuwani shutdown that had almost paralyzed the area amid continuous municipal redemarcation protests, which left more than 20 schools torched last year. We speak to the Department of Basic Education about its state of readiness for this academic year. Well, are we going to see the resurgence of the Fees Must Fall protest again this year? We look at the Fees Must Fall 2016 ramifications. The Department of Higher Education is also giving us a rundown of what they have in store for 2017. And finally, we look at higher education funding application for student financial aid 2017 for the class of 2016. We have NSFIRST to unpack all their plans for us. Like I said, this is a special broadcast. We do not have headlines. This show is strictly dedicated to education matters. Media Monitor, good morning. Let me welcome my guest this morning, Mr. Elijah Mhlanga, Chief Director in Communications and Media Liaison at the Department of Basic Education, as well as political analyst Professor Dinyeko Maluleka. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Thank you for inviting us.
My goodness, you look so ready for 2017. Well, 2016 was a tough year for matric learners, especially those in Vuwani and Limpopo, where a series of violent protests which resulted in the destruction as well as burning of property, including schools, played a negative role, especially for the class of 2016's academic year. Now, learners lost 2 months of teaching and learning. This after residents of Vuwani took to the streets to protest over the area's inclusion into the newly established municipality in the Bembe district. Now, collaborative efforts were made by government to set up camps for learners to recover the time that was lost and prepare them to sit for their preliminary as well as their final exams. Now, a leaked matric maths paper in the province was yet another scandal that added salt to the wound. Let's see more on this insert.
Dinyeko Khosa, accused of distributing the leaked paper. He handed himself to police. Preliminary investigations by the Hawks show the paper was distributed via WhatsApp and was traced back to this man.
A rewrite is something that we do if a large number of learners are involved and we are not sure as to how many and where they are. But at this point, we believe that on the basis of what the police have done, we know who got the paper before it was written.
The Education Department says only a small number of learners was involved, and there will be no need for matriculants to rewrite the paper.
During the investigations, we found that the suspect owns 2 colleges in Malamulele area. So we are still busy with the investigations. We believe that he was not doing this alone. He was with other people who obviously assisted him. So we are on their way.
Mike Maringa, SABC News, Guyana.
Gentlemen, very worrying developments throughout the whole of last year. Elijah, maybe in this clip you say that a few learners were involved in the leak scandal and that they will not rewrite the paper. Do tell us more. Can you give us the numbers and what action will be taken against those?
What happened was that the Hawks helped us to track down all the learners who had access to the question paper, and they also gave us other forms of evidence that indicated the extent of the leak and who had seen it before the exam was written. And in terms of our regulations, if it is found that certain people had breached the security system of the examinations, we then have to put them through the normal disciplinary procedures. And that is what is going to happen. We will withhold their results until such time that the investigation has been completed. But if you don't know the extent of the leak, you then request everyone in that general area to rewrite the paper to protect yourself as a department.
Professor, what do you make of this? I mean, reports indicate that this is now the second year that a grade 12 exam paper has been leaked in this province. Shouldn't we really be worried?
Yeah, we should be worried. I mean, I think it's a form of corruption. Over and above it, there is the the idea of trying to make money to take advantage of innocent students. Because money must be changing hands somewhere, in order for that paper to be distributed. But it is much more serious than corruption at the level of the financial gain, because what you're doing really is that you are creating a situation where students without the necessary competence will then pass and move on to university, where they will surely fail or take too long to complete at university.
So it's not beneficial for them anyway.
It is actually counterproductive, this kind of thing. So I'm glad to hear Elijah say that they are working with the police to make sure that this kind of thing is really, it's the sort of thing we ought to stamp out of the system completely.
Yeah, Elijah, let's talk about that. I mean, the Prof talks about corruption. How is the department going to try and deal with the scourge, particularly this year?
Well, when the leak was reported, when it emerged, the minister quickly put together a team to conduct an investigation. Yes. And one of the terms of reference was for a review of the entire examination system to see if there are weaknesses that we need to address as a matter of urgency. She invited private investigators to come and help us. And that was done over and above the work that is being done by the Hawks. And they too are able to tell us how they believe this leak could have taken place, and therefore make recommendations on how we can stamp it out from the education system, particularly examination system. So we hope that the recommendations that the ministerial investigating team are going to make will help us change the system forever. But what you find, though, is the fact that the system needs people for it to work. So there's always people inside the system who work with people outside the system to cause this type of thing. That's why the professor was saying that there's a monetary gain in it, and indeed the Hawks have evidence that some money was deposited into somebody else's account. So those are the things that we need to look into. We need harsh sentences, we need harsh action to be taken against people who are threatening the image, the profile and integrity of our matric certificate.
Professor?
Yeah, I like especially the last part, because it's really, at the end of the day, there are a lot of questions about the worth of the matric certificate.
Yeah.
What is it worth? What does it stand for? Does it stand for what it says it stands for? So if a student has got university exemption, do they really have university exemption? As long as incidents such as these continue to happen, then the integrity of the certificate, the quality of the system will continue to be doubted. So we need to secure the integrity of the system.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the Vuwani issue now and the burning of schools. Elijah, I'm sure a lot of people are willing and ready to hear. I mean, do you think that the quick intervention by your department actually saved the learners in order to proceed for the 2017 academic year?
Well, it did to a large extent, but we couldn't do it alone without the cooperation of that community. We had to work with members of that community, traditional leadership, religious leaders, in the form of the Pastors Forum, as the Makado Forum, and other people in that area who were concerned about the situation. And we were able to remove those learners, and we took them to camps, and the parents supported the move. And we had to make sure that whatever was happening there, we needed to save the academic year, and that we were able to do, and we are really grateful for that. We just hope that this year we are not going to see any of the protest action that we saw in 2016, because it's completely undesirable. In fact, we will see in the next few days what the results are going to show for the learners in Vuwani, because they were taken to camp. Some of them had never left home ever in their lives, and they found themselves in a situation where you're far away from home, far away from your familiar environment, far away from the support that you usually need for you to focus on your studies. And much as that was an attempt to save the school year, it also brought in new issues that we had never dealt with before.
Like what?
And well, social issues. Those learners had to live without parental or guidance and parental support and parental care. They were in the hands of teachers, some of whom had never had the
Unfamiliar
experience.
surroundings, yeah.
Exactly. Had never lived with learners in the same compound for an extended period. So that brought other issues in terms of discipline. We had to now call the police to try help us. There are all sorts of things that we had to deal with. And that as well was something that was undesirable. So in the meantime, other parents back in Vuwani were removing their learners from schools in that area to other areas where education was not disrupted. So it had a lot of undesirable effects in the general psyche of that community, but to the learners as well, because what we observed is that in the first week of August, when schools reopened and everyone went back to normal business, those learners there were still not in a good mental state for them to go back to school. We had to invite the Department of Social Development to bring in social workers and counselors to try, talk to them and provide counseling services to ensure that they get back into a school mode again. And at that time, we're approaching examinations. So we don't wish to see any of the sort this year.
Elijah, while we're still there, Professor, I'm going to get to you now. I just want to get from Elijah. Elijah, in terms of the rebuilding of the school structures, how far is the department, and will the schools reopen this year?
The schools will reopen because we had mobile classrooms which were delivered there and were used for learning and teaching, also for examinations. But Treasury also allocated 177 million rand lead last year for us to be able to try rebuild those schools and other schools that were damaged in that area. And that work is underway. Contractors have been appointed, and we hope that in the next few months those schools will have been fixed so that everyone can get back to normal.
Professor, I know we're still awaiting the results to see if government intervention was enough, but do you think these measures that they took were, substantiated enough?
I just want to say two things to what he said. I'm glad that he talks about the psychosocial devastation. Often when we see a school burnt, we cry about the school. We look at the infrastructure, the cost of it, and we estimate how much it costs to replace a school. What we never think about, or do not think enough about, is the psychological damage and the social damage that goes with such burning of the schools. And this will take much longer to fix. You can rebuild a school, but how do you rebuild the social fabric? How do you rebuild the psyche of the students? So for me, it is very important. And just one final thing.
Quick one, Prof.
All these problems in Vuwani had nothing to do with education.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely nothing to do with education. And here we are, the Department of Basic Education has to step in. So clearly education is a soft target in the community, in South Africa, and that's what we need to address.
We'll definitely address that, and more. Stay tuned, because when we come back, we're going to look at the Department of Basic Education state of readiness for the shortfall academic year 2017. After the short break, stay with us. Welcome back to Media Monitor, the special broadcast as we talk about education matters. Now, a lot has happened in the past year regarding education, topping headlines. We saw, of course, the Pretoria Girls High learners protesting against the school's hair policy, which caused a public outcry and accusations of racism. The increase in school violence, with some being fatal, especially in KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape. Now, the issue of learners being members of a gang and teachers caught in the crossfire. A Hanover high school teacher was stabbed by a pupil right in front of the learners. The learners who witnessed such a horrific act were reported to be receiving counselling. Now, bullying is also another factor coming to the new year. One wonders if we'll see the latter unfold when schools reopen. We continue speaking to Mr. Elijah Mhlanga about the state of readiness for the 2017 schooling curriculum. Elijah, with all these mentioned, how far are you in terms of solving some of these impasses at our schools?
Well, some of the things that we look at when we talk about readiness is the delivery of textbooks, the delivery of stationery to our learners, and whether we have enough teachers in the schools to teach the required subjects in specific areas. But one of the big issues that has been rising in terms of priority in South Africa is the school admissions. By late last year, we had 120,000 learners in Gauteng who were yet to be placed in schools, and in the Western Cape, we had just under 30,000, which means these two provinces experience a huge demand for spaces. You see parents migrating from other provinces to the two provinces, and Gauteng is the biggest recipient of parents who want to enroll their children in schools in the province, and that has been causing a lot of challenges, particularly in January when schools open, because even when schools reopen, with a huge demand, we are not able to place all the children. And we know Gauteng has been trying to build schools to try address the challenge, but every time they build a school, there are new people that come in. And that is something that as government we really need to look at. And Western Cape is the same. They are receiving a lot of learners from the Eastern Cape and other provinces. And we are facing a real situation where schools are full and yet parents demand to enroll their children in those schools. And that results in overcrowding. And overcrowding is not desirable because it means that those children there are not going to receive good quality education because the physical environment is not conducive.
Professor, what do you think is actually causing that movement of the children from their area, so to say, where they're schooling to other areas and provinces?
You know, it is the perception of
better education,
better schools, better run provinces. All these perceptions parents have. And their dreams for their child is to take the child out of this area where the school system is not strong. Now, the problem, and of course there is a racial dimension to it in the micro geographical areas, where you find that parents want to take the kids from the so-called black schools into so-called white schools or formerly white schools. And then there is a bottleneck because it is as if we expect a few schools to do for the country what ought to be done by a greater number of schools. The solution to this is that we must reach a stage where each and every school in this country is good enough to serve the people in the community. If we don't have that situation, we will continually have parents who are on a wild goose chase for the better school, for a best school. And by the way, it also happens at the level of universities.
Elijah, what's the department doing to address these concerns?
Well, we need to take responsibility as members of the community because each community needs to be interested in the affairs of the school that is located within their area. And that means parents through their school governing body need to make sure that they maintain schools, but most important, they need to monitor learning and teaching because that's where the problem is. They need to make sure that learners arrive on time and teachers are teaching for the required hours a day, and make sure that when assessments are done, if your child fails, you go to school and ask why, so that your child can get support. And if you do that, then you'll ensure that learning outcomes are prioritized, and where there's good performance, that's where parents are likely to want to go enroll their children. As far as the department is concerned, we allocate monies to schools, and the school governing bodies through their finance committees need to make sure that the general and physical environment is maintained. If there's one broken window, fix it immediately. Don't wait until there's 20. If the door is broken, fix it immediately because the money for that is there. If the money for that is not there, make sure the district is aware of that and the province is aware of that so that we can attend to all these issues immediately. Where there's no teacher, raise the alarm, make sure the department provides a teacher for you. So it's those basic things really that we need to focus on. If we can get that right, then you will see people staying in their local communities to make sure that their children go to schools that are near them, because there are many benefits towards that, because you don't have to spend on transport, you don't have to spend on accommodation, you don't have to stress about having to remove your learners from their familiar environment to some other place.
Professor, let's come up with a solution here. Do you think if the Department of Basic Education actually sent inspectors to the schools to check on the upkeep of the schools, things would be much better?
No, I mean, there's no silver bullet. I think that it will take a number of interventions, including the participation of the local community.
Absolutely.
Taking ownership of the school and making sure that the school, I mean, one of the most depressing things for me has been to see communities standing by when the schools are being burnt down, to see adults participating in acts of burning down school property and even looting from school property. So I think we have a long way to go. But you see, it's a little like I am the only one who can swim, you and Elijah can't swim. Instead of you learning to swim, you want to come and hold on to me. The three of us are going to sink and to drown.
Yeah.
And my fear is that the basic education system will collapse if we put too much pressure on the few schools that are good, that have the formula right.
Because everybody wants to go
Precisely,
there.
instead of making sure that more and more schools are capable.
It's very interesting. You know, when I started school, I was actually the only black child. And 5 years later, there was about 45 black kids in that school. So the rate is quite alarming.
We're glad you survived.
I did, Professor. Now, Elijah, issues like racism, violence, and general safety at schools came under the fore quite a lot in the previous year. Let's talk about the department's plans. I mean, we know that you've security guards, the deployment of security guards, as well as the planting of CCTV cameras at schools is now a prerequisite. What are your plans in regards to this?
We need to work a little bit more with NGOs and other agents of state, because this is a social matter that as education alone we are not able to tackle successfully. So we have a partnership with the South African Police Service, who come to our schools, talk to learners about bullying, reporting, and how to identify such activities that are not supposed to be taking place in the schoolyard. But we also find that young people, when they have conflict outside the school, they know they are going to meet at school, and that's where they want to resolve this. And it's usually not through talking. They want to resolve it through violence. And through our programs in our schools, we try to teach them respect for self and respect for others, good behavior, good values. And there's so much that we can do. Parents also need to play their part, because we realize that most of this is imported from the streets of the communities where the schools are located into the schoolyard, because people know that because you go to that school, so I'm going to find you there. And that's what we have. But the issue of gangs, that's another one that also comes from the society. In fact, what you see in the Western Cape is a situation where young people get caught in the crossfire while on their way to school. So the gangsterism is not even inside the school. It's in the vicinity of the school, and they become victims of such. So that's something that you can ask education what we are doing about, but it requires a concerted effort from all sectors of society.
Elijah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. That was Elijah Mhlanga from the Department of Basic Education. We'd like to thank him for his time and being with us on this first show of 2017. We're going to take a quick ad break, and we'll have more education matters when we return.
We make sure to be where news is happening,
Both locally and globally.
For the latest business news, stay with us.
From South Africa to the world, we've got all your latest sporting news.
Don't miss our weather updates at every hour.
Stay tuned to News Today, Monday to Friday, from 3 to 5:30 p.m. here on SABC News. It is 2017 and this is Media Monitor. We're talking education matters now. The ongoing call for fees at higher education level to fall has disrupted various universities' academic year last year, which has now resulted to universities having 2 sittings for exams, one which took place end of last year and another one is taking place now in January. Following a year of protest, the movement has much been tarnished by violence with a heavy private security presence on campus. Now this after students damaged university property, including libraries, with incidents of arson. Let's take a look at this insert.
Students have been protesting intermittently at UCT throughout the year. Exams were postponed by 2 weeks due to the ongoing tension. Students sat for exams on the main campus with heavy security in place.
Yeah, it was incredibly difficult trying to prepare during the unrest and uncertainty, but you have to do what you have to do.
I just wrote my first exam now and it was fine. No issues at all, and yeah, it's been relatively calm on campus.
It's good to finally write the exams and hope it'll all go well and everyone will be able to finish.
UCT says there is common ground from which a proper dialogue can be built. It says the agreement includes ongoing discussions and the establishment of a rapid response task team to monitor the implementation of the agreement.
Among those that have been agreed on is the issue of setting up an institutional transformation and reconciliation process. There is also the issue of considering amnesty as well as accountability as out of the Sharkville action in February this year. There is also the issue of looking into financial exclusions, as well as, in addition, the issue of looking into the feasibility of free higher education that is decolonized.
Moholola says students can still defer exams to January next year, but a large number have opted to write this month. Meanwhile, UWC students also started their exams at locations off campus. Mariska Botha, SABC News, Cape Town.
Professor, as we start the year, let's look at what the year was in terms of the fees must fall protests. We first heard, of course, there was to be no increment for the 2016 year, and then everything went fine. And then suddenly, protests begin. What do you think is going to happen this year because the issue has not been resolved?
Yeah, well, if you think carefully, the protests in 2016, the main trigger for the protests, and I'm not justifying it, was the ministerial statement announcing the fee increases for this year, the dispensation that would be followed, which in many ways was quite radical in terms of how far government was prepared to go in funding the so-called missing middle. In particular, including the missing middle into the whole dispensation, the NSFAS dispensation. So you'll recall that until, I think it was the 19th of September last year, there were no real protests. I mean, a few started in anticipation of that, but it was actually after that announcement that you had protests coming up. And my sense is that, the students have legitimate concerns, and the debate is a legitimate one, because the debate is, what about those students who still fall outside of the 600,000 cut-off point that has been made? What about free education as a whole? Now, none of these things are really beyond the realm of discussion. Even though government has taken a position, I hope that in 2017 we will be able to talk about these things, because ultimately that's all we can do. We will have to end up sitting down as students, as management, as department of universities, management of universities. So it is my fervent hope that these 3 parties, at least, as well as the community, because one of the positive things is that towards the end of 2016, you had parents coming into the fray, wanting to influence things a little bit more. You had churches and NGOs coming into the fray, seeking to intervene and to help. Because the solution will not be a military one.
Yeah.
The solution will not come from the security sector. So, and I think that those are some of the lessons we should bring into 2017 from 2016.
Please clarify on that matter, Prof. I just wanted to know, I mean, you seem to blame the issuing of the statement as the cause of the protest, but how then should that situation be handled?
No, I'm not blaming it. I'm just stating a matter of fact.
Yeah. So how should
I'm
it
just
have been
stating a
handled?
matter of fact that chronologically, if you think about it,
it was after
all
the announcement,
started
yeah.
then. Partly because there was a sense from because there's nothing that any single university did to cause the students to start to protest
That's
necessarily. The main trigger was that statement. And so it seems to me that there is need for government and students to get closer to one another. It seems to me that there is need for university management and students to get closer to one another and for the creation of more and more opportunities for dialogue because there was clearly a lot of anger after that statement. And the anger is not necessarily justified by myself, but there was that anger after the statement.
Speaking of those needs for government, students and varsity to have that dialogue, we know that there is a fees commission that is currently taking place, and it was actually taking place during those student protests, and we're still awaiting the outcome of that. What do you think we can expect? Let's speculate, Professor.
Well, I know that sometimes towards the end of last year, that commission did issue a preliminary statement, but that statement was very brief, simply showing up all the concerns that they had received, the number of submissions that they have received, and so on. So a lot hangs on the shoulders of Justice Heha and his colleagues, because that is the real issue. That's the real burning issue in this country now. Can the country think creatively about ways and means to lessen the burden of having to pay for education, especially for students coming from poor households? Is the notion of free education perhaps, can it be thought of and constructed in a manner that speaks to our situation at this point in time as a country? That's what the commission will have to speak to, it seems to me. So a lot hangs on it, but there's also a ministerial task team that was established by the president also to deal with the issues in higher education. And I hope that task team will also come to the party and join forces with the commission and with student organizations. And I hope that the other initiatives, national initiatives that were started last year, because sometimes in South Africa we start a lot of initiatives to address one problem, but these initiatives do not always cohere. So the South African Council of Churches has an initiative. There's one initiative where Justice Tigang Moseneke and other judges were asked to intervene. There's HEPAD, the Higher Education Parents Education Dialogue. Also, all of these initiatives need to come together and find a solution for the country, because this, if we can't solve this as a country, then our entire higher education system is under threat.
But, I mean, Professor, I think the big issue here when the students were protesting was, and this issue also divided the students, the call was for free education. And when you say free education, is it free education for all students or for the poorest of the poor? And how do we then determine those poor students?
Well, that's really the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
That's the heart of the matter, because the protesting students are saying we want free quality education for everyone, and we want it yesterday. Now. Well, we want it now for everyone. Whether the child is a child of a billionaire in South Africa or the child is a child of a poor woman living in Mkuku somewhere, we want free education, because the argument is that education is a good, is a public good, and no one ought to pay for it. Government, on the other hand, seems to be saying, and the Minister of Higher Education has said this a few times, Minister of Science and Technology has said this a few times, that we are not yet at any place as a country where we can pay for the education of those people who can pay for themselves.
Yeah.
Rather, we should actually be using the money of those people who can pay for themselves to subsidize those students whose parents cannot pay for them. So that is the heart of the matter. And I think that what we need perhaps is a road map that says, this is what we can't do now, but this is what we can do now. These are the goals that we have for the next 5 years or 6 years or 7 years towards this ideal, if we agree about that ideal. That's really what we need to be able to put on the table, because until now, you know, you have one side that says free quality education now and another that says it's not possible. And that's a stalemate. To break the stalemate, I think a roadmap would be a useful place to start.
I hope they're all listening. We're going to take a quick ad break, and after that we'll look into the Department of Higher Education issues on university funding and more. Stay tuned for that.
Give me that paperwork.
Where is your
Give me that paperwork.
Where is your paperwork?
Like it's everything, I don't know what's going on. Suddenly I'm locked up.
This is not fair. Center Twasezan. Not fair.
Ukuputse rent ka 200. Hafi ukupula ka 200. Uri ngwana uyi 150 plus koloi leone tlamehile in another one 150.
I'm just the one to lock you out.
Yes, you just want to lock me then out.
Who are starting gangsterism.
No.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Now, higher learning institutions in South Africa received a blow this year with the much publicized Fees Must Fall movement, causing learners to miss out on a large amount of their academic year. Now, the impact of this has questioned the state of readiness of universities for 2017. Professor, do you think universities are ready for the intake of those students that are coming in for this year?
I think by and large they are. Of course, they are ready in a manner that is slightly more diminished than they would have been in other years, given the challenges that were there at the end of last year. But I think all stakeholders, by the end of the year, did find one another, which is why exams were written in almost all of the universities. And even the fact that some examinations will be written now in January is part of that finding of one another. I think we must not look at this too negatively, because it is because the stakeholders got together and fleshed out and negotiated a way forward, which is the only way we are going to get out of the problems that we face. And we must also not be totally negative about Fees Must Fall either, because what Fees Must Fall has done that is positive is that Fees Must Fall has put on the agenda of the nation the importance of higher education in a very powerful manner. It's not possible now for anyone in this country, government included, universities included, the public sector included, it's no longer possible to pretend that higher education is not a priority, that it is not vital for the economy and for the development of this country. Fees Must Fall has done that. So, and I think we should sometimes we become too negative about the fact that there was violence. Of course, it's regrettable and there should never have been violence. But there are positives. The higher education sector and the system in South Africa is one of the best on the continent. And part of the reason you are having the clamor that you have is because everyone wants to get in, because it is a good product. And what we need to do is to find one another so that we can continue to ensure that the product is of a high quality.
You know, Prof, we're just talking about children moving from one school to another school. Isn't that what's going to happen if these universities then become free for everybody?
Well, I don't understand the call for free or fee-free education to mean that whether you have passed or not, you are going to be able to go in. I assume that the academic standards will
remain the same.
And that will be the first, most important criterion for getting in.
Look, Prof, we saw what the unrest did to the academic year. It totally messed it up. Do you think that we are actually underestimating as a country the grave implications of these school disruptions?
I think that the implications of the disruptions are dire, both at basic education level, but also at university level. The idea of a total shutdown, revolutionary as it may sound, is actually one whose consequences are too ghastly to contemplate. If you do have a situation where you stop matric from being written for a year, or you have a situation where you stop universities from completing a year of academic delivery. If you have that situation, then I can't even begin to think about the numbers that we're talking about. The numbers of engineers, of doctors, of professionals in very vital professional sectors who will not be produced. Just 1 year, you stop the tap for a year, the consequences are very dire. Of course, if you're protesting, you want to stop it so that, you can have maximum impact. But it's actually, it's something that we ought to be very careful about going forward.
Professor, there was another huge outcry by the students about the security that was actually deployed on campus to actually look after the campuses because of the violent incidents there. Did you think it was the right thing for the universities to do? And I mean, what still needs to happen in terms of we're starting a fresh year? We might see the resurgence of these protests, and a lot of people are saying on campus the security shouldn't be there.
If we as South Africans could reach a stage where we are able to protest without violence. Peacefully. Because let's not just blame the students, because the violent protest is a South African phenomenon. You see people burning libraries in communities. Even clinics have been burnt down. Deaths have occurred during protests. It seems to me that what we need as South Africans is a really deep conversation about how to protest without involving violence in our protests. So that's the first thing. But of course, Alicia, universities are not army camps. Of course, universities are not police barracks. Of course, universities do not mix well with the presence of huge contingencies of security personnel. It is not normal. It is not natural. It doesn't sit well with anyone who has worked at the university for half as long as I have done, even. It's not a normal situation. It's an abnormal situation, and all of us should be doing everything we can to make sure that we move away from this. We can't normalize this situation. But then again, in May last year, we saw the Sanlam Auditorium at the University of Johannesburg being burnt to the ground. Later on, I think it was in September, we saw the Law Library being burnt down at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And then we saw other buildings being burnt down at the University of Northwest and other places. So, it's a very difficult situation. We can't pretend that these things do not happen. And so the police have a responsibility to protect property and to protect lives. But it's not a situation we want to be in permanently as a system and as a country.
All right. Well, that's where we're going to leave it on that matter. Well, we're still on higher education matters, and after the break, we're going to talk about funding now. But stay tuned for that. It's coming up after the break.
We make sure to be where news is happening,
both locally and globally.
For the latest business news, stay with us.
From South Africa to the world, we've got all your latest sporting news.
Don't miss our weather updates every hour.
Stay tuned to News Today, Monday to Friday, from 3 to 5:30 p.m. here on SABC News. Still watching Media Monitor, the 2017 first episode. Now, student funding was the main issue that came to see the rise of the fees must fall protest from 2015. The missing middle revolted that NSFAS was prejudiced against them, as they were students whose families earn above the NSFAS threshold but are still unable to support their children to access higher education. Now, the Higher Education Department estimates that Treasury will have to find about 2.6 billion rand in order to help fund financially needy students who are unable to afford the 2017 fee hike. Now, the call for free higher education still lingers, but NSFAS students will experience a no-fee increase for this year. Here's more on this clip.
These things are made visible as priorities unless we see that we are in a precipice. As a country, if we don't emphasize education, then there is no way in which politically we can mobilize this to be a priority. The numbers show it. Those who are 15 to 24, the biggest driver of their problems is educational attainment. And if they don't achieve that, there's no future.
We will certainly have to improve, our mobilization strategy, perhaps even repackage our messaging so that our young people truly see value in education.
We are going to see more protests. I'll tell you why, because costs will continue to go up and universities will once again have to put up their fees. So in the middle of the year, we will again have a round of fees being put up, and again we will have a round of protests about it. And again, we might resolve it by putting more millions or billions into universities, but once more it'll be an ad hoc solution.
When the system through its programs and policy direction can no longer help the poor, it means that the poor, by virtue of being poor, will just fall into the cracks of poverty. This is what is going to be worse going forward.
All right, we're very pleased to be joined by NSFAS spokesperson, Mr. Kagiso Mamabolo, who's joining us from our Cape Town studios. Kagiso, Happy New Year. Very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Media Monitor.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you too.
Thank you. Now, Kagiso, applications for 2017, how many applications did you receive, and how will the students know the results of their applications?
Well, you would recall that what we did as NSFAS, we were trying to centralize the application system, which meant that even students that were already at universities had to go on our website and create their own accounts and fill in their details, because we're migrating them from the institutions to a NSFAS system. So by large, in total, when we closed our application last year in November, 30 November, we had over 340,000 users who managed to go on the website and do their applications. And of course, there were still those that were coming through manual applications that came through post. And then when we did the numbers, we had about 94,000 of those that came through manual. So by large, this was the most highest campaign that we have ever seen as NSFAS that was administered by NSFAS for the first time. without the assistance or the reliance of universities and colleges.
Kagisho, there's been a lot of noise about the current NSFAS funding model. I know that when it was debated in Parliament, the department did say that the funding model is going to be relooked. As NSFAS, what criteria do you currently use to fund those students?
Well, NSFAS has been existing for quite some time. I mean, last year we were celebrating 25 years of our anniversary. And this model that we use is very simple. We use a system which we call the means test tool. Commercial banks will use means test to check the level of your affordability, that if they give you a loan, you will be able to repay it back. Whereas at NSFAS, we use the means test tool to look at your level of your inability to afford a loan. So we give you that loan or a bursary based on the fact that the evidence before us is very clear that you may not afford your tertiary funding. So our model was focusing and still focuses on 120,000 as a threshold, that if your family income of all the family members combined and just below 120,000, you will first and foremost be prioritized to receive NSFAS. But we do know, and we have heard last year that government made a decision to say that those that falls above 120,000 and up to 600,000 salary band will still be assisted directly by government, because we call those as the missing middle. So our criteria is simply that if you are doing grade 12, you need to have passed your grade 12, you need to have been admitted at a tertiary institution and met their criteria, and you need to be a South African citizen who comes from a very disadvantaged family. And of course, there have been arguments about who is disadvantaged, and that's why our threshold of 120,000 has been the contention for discussion, and of course, later on, including the missing middle up to 600,000.
Prof, I want to hear your views about the current system when it comes to NSFAS, the funding model.
Well, as Kagisho rightly points out, this will be the first year that NSFAS runs on its own, doesn't outsource the management of the fund to the universities. So I think we're looking forward to a smoother system, and hopefully there will not be any teething problems that will hamper the system. NSFAS is often given a bad name. But actually, without NSFAS over the past 20 or 25 years, many of the South African professionals, leading lawyers and judges and advocates who are black in particular, would not exist without TEFSA, as it used to be called, and then later on NSFAS. So NSFAS has played a great role, at least in the construction of the black middle class in this country, especially through education. I don't know how well they pay back, though. That's another issue, of plowing back that we need to talk about. So I just wish, if I could humbly suggest something, that NSFAS ought to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of speaking about itself, and also making clear what the rules are, the applications are. I mean, I ought to open my newspaper this weekend and find a big page layout that says, this is how you get it, this is where you go, this is what happens. Because, it may look obvious for those of us who work in the system, but it is not necessarily obvious for everyone. And I would like to know all of the people who have become what they are because of NSFAS funding, to raise their hands and say, I am who I am because of NSFAS. And perhaps those kinds of campaigns would help. But of course, the model itself will always need to be thought and rethought, and I believe that we are in such a process at the moment.
Kagisho, how does the department now or the organization plan to deal with the corruption within the system? I mean, a lot of people are saying, how can you make sure that the applicants are actually not deceiving you in their applications?
Well, the corruption has always been a challenge in the past, because you would recall that the outsourcing of the entire system was heavily reliant on institutions, relying on information that is submitted by applicants at universities and colleges, and the institutions applying the means test guidelines, and then and even awarding the bursaries to our students. And NSFAS would come at a later stage of disbursement. And we found that some of the students that were funded at the time were not supposed to be funded. And it's very late in the year. So to remove that student from the list of those that are funded is actually to disadvantage that students. Now, the centralization of the system has made things much easier, because if you recall, when we closed our applications on the 30th of November 2016, we dedicated our time the entire December to verify the information that was submitted. And we use a lot of state agencies to do that. Home Affairs, we run our database through Home Affairs to check that the ID numbers provided are indeed of people that exist as South Africans. And of course, some that have made their transition are indeed deceased as provided. We also check with the SAPS in terms of the information provided, affidavits, the authenticities of those. And also, what was very, very critical in our assessment was the information that we get from Department of Social Development, because most of NSFAS beneficiaries actually used to receive child grants. So SASA has got that database, in which we made use of it to verify. Even further, the Basic Education Department came on board. They gave us the entire database of all the grade 12 learners that were sitting for matric. And we were able to analyze that database prior to our closing date. So it became much more easier for us, because if you were a grade 12 learner at a no-fee school, you were exempted from being means tested, because it meant that your school is really disadvantaged. That to us helped us to eliminate a lot of corruption and also falsification of information. And we do believe that as we continue in 2017 to roll out this new system, we will minimize the risks. I mean, our students this year, they signed the loan agreement form using their cell phone, and they pay for their books, accommodation, and meals using their cell phone, using a USSD code. Wow. We're able to monitor and manage their spending habits as NSFAS, and we are also responsible for accounting for where the money goes to as NSFAS, and we disperse money to the right people. So we no longer give a chunk of money to institutions to see fit where it should go.
Thank you so much. So you've cut out the middleman, Kagisho. Thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. That is Mr. Kagisho Mamabolo of the NSFAS. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. A very quick word before we go on the issue of funding.
Well, funding is the real Achilles heel of the South African higher education system.
Yeah.
We are an underfunded system. Even with NSFAS beefing up its funds so much, we still are an underfunded system. And until we are adequately funded, we may not have had the last of protests.
I've always heard more money, more problems. Professor, thank you so much. And once again, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to thank all my guests for partaking in this informative discussion on education matters this morning. And thank you so much to all our viewers for watching our show, Media Monitor. We hope that you will join us again, same time and place next week. That is right here on the SABC News channel. Have yourself a Happy New Year and stay blessed. Goodbye.